Hello, this is the voice of Stewart Pearce, and welcome to my series of deep dialogues. These are vital conversations I engage in with global soul stewards from all over the planet, providing us with vital understandings about how we can create a new hierarchy of values to help us evolve into a brave new world. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
And welcome, everybody. Firstly, to dear Jude, who is here in a scintillated form. I know she's going to actually be sharing not only the wealth of her extraordinary experience during this incarnation, but also all of the deeper resonances of her connection with the Gaia, and indeed with unity consciousness flowing throughout the entire universe, and dare I say, multiversal. But welcome to you all, and let me just introduce you to Jude by sharing her bio with you. So Dr. Jude Currivan. By the way, Currivan is from where?
Ireland. In Gaelic, its foundation means raven. And of course, I love the idea of being named after Raven, which was the great sort of messenger between worlds, but also the great trickster.
Indeed, the bird of mystery. Well, bless you.
Bird of mystery.
I pause there. I will complete my intro, but I've been intrigued. And in fact, Ryan and I were talking about now. Currivan, where's Currivan from? Okay, so Jude Currivan, Ph.D. Jude is a cosmologist, futurist, planetary healer, author, and member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle, having previously been an international businesswoman. Jude has a master's degree in physics from Oxford University, specializing in quantum physics and cosmology, and a doctorate in archaeology, researching ancient cosmologies. She has traveled to over 80 countries to work with wisdom keepers from many traditions, and is a lifelong researcher into the nature of reality. Jude is the author of 7 extraordinary books, yet both the Cosmic Hologram of 2017 and the Story of the Gaia 2022 have won many awards. And Jude is the co-founder of WholeWorld-View, which we will make sure there is a listing on the screen towards the end of our conversation. So I don't want you looking at her wonderful website now. I want you to attend to this exchange. So Jude, again, namaste to you, and thank you so much for being here.
Stewart, namaste to you. We were talking a little bit earlier when we first met, which was over 20 years ago, in the most wonderful and sacred landscape of Avery, which still is my home.
Yeah.
So it's just wonderful to be together again, and thank you again for this.
Well, thank you. Like ships in the night, we've seen each other for the last 21 years or so.
21 years.
23 years. The College of Psychic Studies and other renowned places. Of course, it's been so wonderful reviewing the extraordinary contribution that you make to our lives, for which, on behalf of all of us, I say thank you.
Well, thank you, Stewart. And what an amazing time for us to come together now again. There's so much flowing and unfolding. So, it just feels very timely for us to be having this conversation. So many thanks.
Bless you. And I feel that this is the fruit of future promise, in the sense of somehow organizing a symposium where we come together for a longer period than an hour, a group of us, maybe a panel or a round circle, for a salon pensée, where we really have time to exchange. So Jude, I want to, of course, I want lots and lots of wonderful opportunity for everybody to meet the enormity of your perspective. And I know that unity awareness is at the very core of your thesis and your practice. And perhaps you could just share with us a few thoughts about what you perceive unity awareness to be at this time.
Well, first of all, Stewart, I feel it's fundamental to the potential choices we make at this time and to the very future of humanity as a species on this planet, our beloved planetary home that I refer to as Gaia. All my life I've been curious, that what a cosmologist really is just someone who's incredibly curious. And for me, from a very early age, I was curious about what reality is about because I was actually experiencing it in what I was coming to understand was perhaps very difficult to many other people. And so in that regard, I was walking between worlds, as it were, in a very vast, grand perspective of reality. So what I mean by unity awareness is really the realization that, as ancient wisdom teachings have told us, as Indigenous teachings have told us, and now as the latest scientific breakthroughs and evidence is showing us, that instead of a worldview of separation and materiality, which basically describes a universe devoid of meaning and purpose, this understanding is now being turned completely on its head to reveal that indeed the nature of reality itself is that our universe exists and evolves meaningfully and purposefully as a unified, multidimensional, mindful, living entity where mind and consciousness aren't what we have, they're literally what we and the whole world are. So by unity awareness, I mean the awareness of the wholeness of our universe and ourselves, therefore, as its microcosmic co-creators. We have meaning and purpose because our universe innately has meaning and purpose. And we're now at this incredible bow wave of its future potential to continue to evolve from simplicity to ever greater levels of complexity. That's what I mean. And, 2,500 years ago in our human journey, there was something called the beginning of what's called the axial age. It was a time when so much insights came through that became the world's religious and spiritual traditions. And that also is important to our sense of self and individuality. But now more and more, there's a realization that we have the possibility of entering a new and unitive age where we literally wake up to remember we're inseparable.
And of course, as we spoke earlier, that we've been consciously realized and working at the embodiment of our spirit for many years, you and I, alongside many of our brothers and sisters. And here we see this remarkable juncture where the axial becomes an immensely informative energy on an experiential level. Excuse me. What I'd love, if you could possibly do, is just to pinpoint, is just to define for us, in your reckoning, what are the key points of mobility that are taking place at this time that bring us into a greater awareness of what unity can be, so that we heal separation, the separation ostensibly for the last 450 years of really devoiding ourselves of the belief in the sacred nature of the Gaia.
Yeah. And it would be great to perhaps look at that 430 years, not in a lot of detail, but realizing also it was a journey of individuation. It was a journey that actually enabled us, through the scientific method per se, which was part of it, to delve more deeply into the nature of physical reality. But I'm actually a great fan of Francis Bacon, who started the scientific method, and through a whole series of mistranslations, what he was aiming to do, in my perspective, was not to sort of exclude divinity and the divine from our understanding. It was to reveal it more deeply. And 400 years after he wrote this incredible book called De Augmentum Scientiarum, and 400 years of very powerful esoteric cycle, in 2023, we now, through this scientific method, which is turning everything on its head from the science of the last sort of couple of hundred years, into a realization that reality is ultimately unified. So for me, the game changer now is the evidence. Because, you know, universal wisdom teachings, indigenous wisdom teachings, ancient traditions have always sort of, you know, shared with us the wholeness of reality. And some of them, the profound awareness that mind and consciousness aren't what we have, but literally what we in the whole world are. But nonetheless, we now have, at all scales of existence and many, many different fields of research, the scientific evidence and breakthroughs that converge with this understanding into this integral, this perspective that unity isn't ideal, it's real. It's our existential reality. And we now have the grounding, and we can actually now articulate a unitive narrative that can underpin and frame us in the decisions, the choices that are now, we need to, you know, we have the opportunity, but we are now unavoidable. Are we going to choose to stay in the illusion of materialism and separation? Or are we going to wake up to remember who we really are, and that we are unique, differentiated, but inseparable from the wholeness of our universe and its multi-dimensional magnificence?
Beautiful. And of course, your wanderings, your very purposeful wanderings, your pilgrimage has been often in relation to the wisdom traditions, the great indigenous people of our planet. And I wondered if there was a way of being able to balance any of the significant experiences that you had with indigenous people, and how your awareness was deepened of the scientific model that we're now seeing vis-a-vis the breakthroughs, the scientific breakthroughs that you feel are being made. So we deal with the sacred perspective of the wisdom traditions and moving into the more temporal perspective of the scientific breakthroughs.
Well, what I feel is the scientific breakthroughs are actually now convergent with those indigenous. You know, I talk about in a recent course I've done that the ancient traditions offered three paths to these deeper awareness of the nature of reality. There was a path of the sage, the path of the intellect, the path of the understanding, as it were. There was a way of the shaman, which is the way of the heart and the experience. And there was a revelatory path of the seer. And my sense now is that we can interweave those three paths into a head, heart, hands, as it were, into a whole beingness of our you know, evolutionary potential. Because with the science comes the understanding that actually correlates very closely with many of the ancient sage wisdom, certainly in terms of number and geometry and harmony. Yeah, absolutely correlates with that and takes it forward, correlates with the way of the shaman, but additionally to the cycles and the web of life the shamanic path reveals, there is this sense of our universe embodying an innate evolutionary impulse from simplicity to complexity. So it's more a sort of spiral through space and time of increasing complexity. And then there's the revelatory perception of the seer, and the reality that this new whole worldview modeling, and you know, naturalizes multidimensional realities. So it naturalizes those mystical seeings, revelatory experiences, and opens us up to the adventure of engagement and communication and guidance from the wisdom of our entire universe and our planetary home Gaia. What an invitation! What a potential adventure!
Beautiful. And were there in your pilgrimages around the world, were there any particular cultures that you related to on a soul level that you saw as being individually but also collectively significant for this time?
There are a number. I found that the ancient traditions of India, China, Egypt, which were very more of the sage, resonated powerfully, but also my journeys with Indigenous communities, resonated with the heart. And then, of course, I've been guided by discarnate as well as incarnate teachers all my life. So I think what came forward was that there isn't a single path, that there is this confluence and these different ways of knowing and knowing and embodiment and experiencing that all are all inclusive and key and fundamental to an overview and a perception of what this is all about. But the thing that I think perhaps was most important for me was what I wrote about in 2 books after those 13 pilgrimages. I've done many, many more, but those particular 13 pilgrimages, which was to really activate the planetary grid and sentience for a shift of consciousness. And those 2 books were the 13th step, which told the journey story, but the 8th chakra, which told the inner potentizing and expansion of our awareness beyond our sense of self to include, not move away from, but add, expand our awareness in terms of transpersonal awareness, which is ultimately the path to Buddhic awareness, Christed awareness, unified awareness, and how by activating the essence of what I call the 8th chakra of the universal heart, it sort of opens us up to that remembering that we are whole, we belong, to the whole world, and the unconditional love that certainly in my experience and many, many others now I know, awakening up to this realization of wholeness and oneness and the incredible sense of empathy and compassion and caring that opens us up to. And then the journey continues, but from that perspective that transcends our personal sense of self.
And I know that you were very touched by the Indigenous people that you visited and how they encouraged you into a very deeper awareness of the sensate nature of your body, and that the way that the cosmos and the way that the unification of all is held deep within the cells of our bodies in these very potent and profound experiences that they evoke through ritual, and how ritual is a key element of your work, whereby we can really draw into the cosmology of stillness and silence to feel the great voice of the Gaia speaking to us. And then we flash into the societal functions that are taking place at the moment, which of course are glaring in the forefront of our consciousness because of here we are living in a post-COVID era, and of course the economic situation that's going on, the rearrangement of the central organizing principles. Are there any particular aspects of what you see within societal function at the moment that you feel are really prompting us into great change vis-a-vis unity consciousness?
Oh, very much so. I mean, when we look back on this journey that you referred to earlier, this 400 plus year journey, going back to Francis Bacon, that the scientific method, from all the research I've done with him, was to move beyond the superstition of his era into a way of investigating the nature of reality that could be replicated, that could be verified, that could find a consensus that wasn't based on the authority, a central authority saying this is what the reality is, but an investigative approach that was able to follow the evidence to an ever greater perception of the nature of reality. But because his original insights and guidance were, in my understanding, translated from the original Latin into French by some of the Enlightenment researchers, all of that spirituality was taken out. And it became much more of this, physical perspective. And then when it was translated back from the French to the English, again, all that initial loss of spirituality continued. So we've had a 400+ year journey of ever greater perceptions of materialism and separation, and even the deep insights from the science of quantum physics and relativity. Their philosophical, their underpinnings, the clues they gave us in terms of the wholeness of reality were pushed to the side. And what was focused on was what they might enable us to develop in terms of technology. And that's been remarkable. But we're now at a point when that, and so the previous paradigm, the 19th century paradigm of materialism and separation still took place. It's the paradigm of the Industrial Revolution. It's the paradigm of hierarchies. It's the paradigm of in all our social structures, whether it's corporations, capitalism, education, whatever it may be. But it's based on this completely outmoded and flawed and limited perspective. So we're now at another point, and this is where science really does come into its own. If you follow the evidence with ever more evidence, either the prevailing paradigm says, yeah, we can incorporate that, that's okay, we can explain that within, or eventually it has to say, we can't do this within this paradigm. And that's where we are now. And all those insights from quantum physics, relativity, alongside another 100 and more years of discovery, and certainly the last few years, are revealing that the appearance of our universe indeed does arise from deeper non-physical levels of intelligence and causation in its wholeness. It's just such a wonderful story, but it's turning the whole of that prevailing paradigm on its head. But what it does, it means that instead of coming from a worldview of separation, we're being invited and grounded and supported and underpinned and framed by a unitive narrative based on the evidence, convergent with all of those spiritual and wisdom teachings you spoke of so beautifully, into literally a whole world view of the nature of reality. And it's a reality that has inherent meaning and evolutionary purpose, and we're part of it. So coming from, given our worldviews drive our behaviors, instead of, a worldview of separation driving a world of suffering, a whole worldview of wholeness can usher in an incredible era, a unitive age of unity and diversity. It transforms our economics. I'm working on unitive economics. It transforms justice. I'm working with a group of folks on unitive justice. It transforms our education. I'm working with global educators about a unitive education, and because it gives us a completely cleared lens to see ourselves through, to see the whole world through, and to experience and embody our lives within its nurturing and its underpinning and its framing. It gives us authentic hope, Stewart.
This is so exciting. I mean, so many brilliant lights, like jewels, bubble up, so to speak. I'm mixing metaphors, but suddenly appear as you go through this wonderful exposition. And of course, at this moment, a very dear friend of Jude's will be in conversation, in deep dialogue with me next Monday, who I know you're very much in connection with in terms of the evolutionary inspiration of taking cultural change or the new gestalt, the new paradigm into organizations. And this, ladies and gentlemen, will be Anna-Lou Smitzman, which I'll talk more about later. I know that right at the very core of the way that you blend these beautiful identifications of what's taking place within cosmology and also what's taking place within the organisms of our world, the organisms of our central organizing principles, as well as deep within our own cellular biology, is the notion of breath, and particularly the big breath. And I watched your wonderful video on the WholeWorld-View, on the WholeWorld-View.org website, which I was, of course, tantalized with, because I've been exploring breath as a teacher, as a voice coach, as a sound healer for the last 50 odd years. And so from a very practical, from a very cerebral, from an organized point of view. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about the big breath, because it was so inspirational when I heard you speaking on the video.
Oh, bless you, Stewart. And I love how it resonates with you. And I know your work, which is so profound, and the realization of the fundamental nature of breath, far more than, us sort of taking it for granted, which we so often do. But it all began really because, we're taught at school that our universe began, now the best estimate we have is 13.8 billion years ago as a Big Bang. And we know it wasn't big. That was always a little facetious. But the connotations of a bang are something that's chaotic. And we now know that it was incredibly fine-tuned and exquisitely ordered. So instead of a Big Bang, it was the first moment. As our universe began that 13.8 billion years ago, space-time began in its tiniest form, and as the first moment of an ongoing big breath, because ever since then, just as when we breathe out, space has expanded and time has flowed forward. So our whole universe has been taking this incredible out breath of the big breath ever since. And the way that this new understanding of reality enables that to be understood is that the appearance of our universe, as I mentioned, arises from deeper levels of causation. So the energy matter space-time is not the fundamental nature of our universe, but it's its appearance. But the other big piece of this is that our universe, the best evidence we have is that the appearance of our universe is a holographic projection from the boundary of what we call space-time. It doesn't mean it's not real, but it's the way that cosmic mind creates our universe. So space needs to expand and time to flow if our universe is not just to exist, but to evolve from simplicity to complexity. So that's the story of Gaia and how it all comes about. But of course, the ancient understanding, especially the Vedic tradition that you well know, is that the breath is key, because the breath, when we understand it in this way, is a profound connection between ourselves and our entire universe, with us being essentially a cell of the whole world. And the Vedic word, the Sanskrit word for breath, is the same as for spirit. So with all the work you do, I just love that, you resonate with this, because I do feel that for sound healers, for anyone who's doing breath work, to understand that our entire universe is undertaking its own big breath, co-creative and evolutionary purpose. I hope you enjoy it.
Well, I'm certainly enjoying it, because I love the fundament of just exploring the organism of breath. And if we can become healthy within ourselves and really open up. I find it very intriguing that, for example, Francis Bacon referred to the great breath as the anima mundi, the animating spirit of the universe, because as we know, at the beginning of Genesis, it says, "And God breathed on the surface of the waters and brought forth life, and God breathed into the nostrils of man, and man became a living soul." So for them, it was absolutely quintessential. But then, of course, as we know, they didn't take their breath for granted in post-medievalism, or during the body of medievalism, because after all, human life was quite short. And one of the first things that could be affected was the pneuma of the lungs. And so they were very respectful of the way that they looked after their breath. And I believe that, apropos the Big Bang, the big breath in, the big breath out, a sound was possibly made. That the same thing, it's a reflection of holding a mirror up to our own image, isn't it? Or our image is held up to the reflection of the universe, of how we sound. We breathe and then we sound. And there's no other way about it.
And I love also that, the ancient tradition of the primordial Om,
Yes.
Again, in the ancient Indian tradition. And we now know that when we go back to that first epoch, after the first moment of the big breath, as space expanded for the first 380,000 years or thereabouts, space was too hot to enable atoms to recombine and therefore to be transparent to light. But it was transparent to sound. And we now understand that in that earliest 380,000 years, that sound, acoustic pulses were literally pulsing what would become the first energy and matter of our universe into the very beginnings of structure. And the best analysis we have is that there was a chord of 3 notes, as it were, that the relationship was sounding this primordial om of our universe, sounding our universe into being, which I just find wondrous, absolutely wondrous.
And, to speculate how so many of our brothers and sisters who are moving through or have moved through near-death experience, I'm thinking of Anita Moorjani and her extraordinary experience, which she wrote, of course, in that wonderful book, Dying to Be Me.
Dying to Be Me, yeah.
And then Eben Alexander, Proof of
Exactly.
Heaven, where they both speak of the fact that one of the transcendental unifications that they experienced was the extraordinary humming or
Yes.
oming that was taking place within this non-physical, beyond weight, space, or time place. I mean, it's difficult because our words are reductionist. Place, domain, kingdom, level of consciousness, which is what you're referring to, that deep within the substance of unity consciousness, there is this extraordinary impulse.
Yes.
And as we look into what's happening in our society today, I know we reflected on COVID earlier, and we were talking about societal change and the big archetypal instrument of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's passing from an archetypal point of view. I know that you were referring to your own particular conversation with that, how it touched you very, very deeply. I wonder, in relation to the big breath, in relation to the substance that maybe is taking place right now, which is a recovering of the breath, but the next level of exposure, that we know that when we're in a state of deep grief, when we're in mourning, when we are weeping profusely, we breathe in a galvanic way. I wonder, is there anything that you could refer to in your experience about how Queen Elizabeth's passing as an archetypal unit of these times, particularly in relation to, it seems that we're moving through the death or a transformation of the archetype of the sovereign into, or the king, into the emergence of the superhero, the shamanic magician.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, just to go back one step into COVID,
Yeah.
I mean, when I wrote the Story of Gaia, or as I tend to say, the Story of Gaia wrote me, because I really do feel the Story of Gaia wrote me. I wrote about viruses, and viruses are one of the oldest and simplest of Gaia's biological children. And whereas her other biological organisms progressed from simplicity to complexity, viruses took a different route in a sense. They simplified. But viruses are communities. So they actually have language, and they actually have dialects, and they actually, as a community, can choose whether to kill their hosts or to go into a symbiotic relationship with their hosts, or a culling process which combines both. But I found it, as a student of universal purpose on a metaphysical level and a spiritual level, I found it very interesting that COVID emerged as a viral infection, because viruses have always been evolutionary change agents for Gaia's progress. Whenever there's been a sort of a change, a real leap forward in the evolutionary process that's happened through Gaia's story, viruses have been fundamentally involved because they can change, they can mutate far quicker than any other biological organism, bacteria or more complex. So when there's a breakdown, when there's then a very rapid breakthrough into the next arc of evolutionary progression, viruses play a huge role because of their ability as part of what's called horizontal gene transfer to create, with the underlying intelligence of our universe and our planetary home, a way forward. So the fact that it was a viral epidemic that stopped us in our tracks, nothing else was, and yet we're continuing to run forward in this societal perspective of materialism and separation. And my sense is, and I'd love your perspective on this, and anyone who's got a question or a perspective in the chat, that it stopped us in our tracks, but it also caused a lot of people, perhaps more than ever before, to question why they were living as they were and what really mattered to them and how they could change their lives to give them more meaning and purpose. So I think that's part of our evolutionary questioning, awakening, and choice at this moment. But the other thing in terms of specific is that, first of all, you know, the Queen wasn't just the Queen of Great Britain. She was in the United Kingdom. She was the Queen of a number of other, the head of state of a number of other countries, but also the head of the Commonwealth for something like 54 countries. So her reign and her passing was literally global in that regard, in terms of the sense. For me, she embodied what I call sovereignty. It wasn't just that she wore a crown, but she often signed herself, "Your servant, Elizabeth." For me, she embodied what I feel is that transcendental embodiment of sovereignty, which is sovereignty, when she was serving the good of the whole. And I do feel that Charles, King Charles now, and Prince William, that they too really understand this, and they understand it primarily because of her, what I also call soul modeling. So that goes beyond a role model to be a soul model. And I feel that she was, for all of us, A, a soul model, and B, a sovereign. And that, in a way, is, I hope, her legacy to us. And on a very personal level, I was born in 1952. I've never known any other sovereign in that regard. And so for me, it was a very emotional passing. But it also felt, and I've been feeling her presence, because you and I both have a perspective of the consciousness of, you know, the consciousness extends beyond the demise of our body. So I feel her presence still. And I feel that we're now moving into what is truly an existential moment of choice. And going back to what I said, is it a choice where we do wake up to remember we're inseparable, where we, for each of us, choose what is our sovereignty? For each of us choosing, you know, what are we as soul models? And it doesn't need to be that, you know, you know, I happen to be the head of state of the United Kingdom. Thank goodness the United Kingdom dodged a bullet that I'm not. But, you know, but it is really important because each of us has that ability to choose to be sovereign in our own life's journey and to be a soul model for the good of the whole in our life's journey, it seems to me.
It's so beautiful to hear you speak in this way, because the cosmological perspective that you have, that is also, as we've noted through the 45 minutes that we've been speaking, is very grounded. But what we feel from you is the grace and the bounty and the beauty of cosmology, and how, as we refer to the nature of Elizabeth, who was the Queen, you speak of her from this really tangible, archetypal perspective, which, as we know, is one of the effusions, one of the expressions of cosmology. And if we refer to the opinionation that is often being placed within the field of consciousness that we live in, that it's often to do with the sparkiness of separation and the denial of all the varying opinions, that, or rather the opinions deny the level of grace that you're speaking of. That, if we can, I hope everybody's able to listen into the weaving of what Jude is saying, because her level of consciousness comes from a very different space from that of the antagonistic view of separation. And weaving through what we were talking about in relation to the breath. I just wanted to sort of hover there for a moment, because you have a great beauty in the way that you speak of it. As we reflect on these moments, we know that the substance of her passing moves her into a much broader perspective of consciousness as an unseen, non-physical reality. But at the same time, her presence is so evocative in our midst as we rearrange our social systems. As you noted her behavior through those years, that 70-year of a reign, and the fact that you were able to see it from you were 2 years of age when she was coronated, as an American friend of mine said the other day, and I thought that was a wonderful new word, that she was coronated.
Correlated.
As you review her life, what were the qualities of her behavioral process in the role that she fulfilled, both as a mother and as the mother of her children, the mother of her family, and also the mother of the nation and the Commonwealth, and the extrapolating aspect of the fact that if you mention the Queen anywhere in the world, that it was always Queen Elizabeth that everybody thought about, rather than talking about Queen Noor of Jordan, without any disrespect to her, or the Queen of Denmark. What aspects of her personality, what aspects of her behavior impressed you most?
Well, I was very moved by what President Macron said when the Queen passed. He said and speaking to the British people, he said, to you she was your Queen, but for us she was the Queen. So in a sense, the sense I have is this archetype of what queenship, and in her soul modeling, sovereignty is literally embodied. And not just throughout her life, but continuing, because archetypes are part of our collective awareness. So for me, she embodied that essence of sovereignty in feminine leadership, because what the other aspect I felt was so moving and so powerful was that, of course, we have our societies have tended to be patriarchal. And I go on a lot in my work about the integration of the feminine and the masculine, not that one moves to the other, but as, the ancient tradition, it takes two pillars to hold up the sky, a bird needs two wings to fly. It's that sense of the sacred marriage. So, but for me, she embodied this sense of feminine leadership, which was not follow me, and all the rest of it, but it was, how can I serve? Servant leadership, a seeing and a sensing, a wisdom and a tuning, and for the good of the whole. She embodied that for the good of the whole. It wasn't about her. It was about how could she serve the good of the whole, and the good of the whole were all her people. You knew her, but everything that I know about her says she didn't have a snobbish bone in her body. She didn't have a snobbish or discriminatory bone in her body. And that was just so wonderful. And her wisdom and her lack of egocentric perspective meant that she was able to really attune in moments when we really, as a nation and as a Commonwealth, needed her. And I do remember, I'm going to cry now, I do remember at the height of COVID in lockdown, and I think she only gave the one speech, And at the end of it, she quoted Vera Lynn and the song, We'll Meet Again, which was in World War II. And that touched so many people. All she said is, we will meet again. And because it was her, because she was saying it, we all knew that was going to be the case.
Bless you. Yes, the great mother spoke through her, the great mother, in relationship to the substance of what we were describing, mother,
Yes.
mother universal, and also Mother Earth, the Gaia.
Very much so.
Moving through her. And these are the textures that we're speaking about, aren't we? And of course, we saw it through this extraordinary stillness that she had, this stoic stillness, through her grace, through her immense smile.
Yes.
We never saw her explore her shadow. And of course, she was human just as all of us. And so I'm sure, well, I mean, I remember seeing, as a child, I remember seeing a little curlicue of her shadow coming forth in irritation and impatience about somebody. But it was never inflicted upon anybody.
No.
It was just simply an expression of a human foible that she was moving through.
And thank goodness for that, because without that, her humanity, thank you for sharing that, because her humanity was so profound. And the other thing that I know she didn't show so much in public, but I know the myriad stories, she had this fabulous sense of humor.
Yeah. Hysterical. Very hysterical. And I just very quickly, I remember a moment, I think I must have been about 6 or 7, and we were in Norfolk, and it was Christmas time, and we were invited over a series of years to go and see Her Majesty as she was decorating the tree, which she started doing with helpers, obviously, because they're generally speaking rather big trees. Early on Christmas Eve, before the family came and all the presents were actually laid out under the trees and so forth. And I can remember being taken into the Grand Salon at Sandringham and seeing this amazing tree decorated by little ornaments that had been in her family for over 400 years, going all way back through Charles I and all that took place vis-a-vis the War of 25 years and then the Restoration, going right into Elizabeth's time, the first. And I remember pulling on one of these and it unsettled the tree, and the tree was about to fall onto Her Majesty. My father, fortunately, in superhuman way, grabbed it, steadied it, and all I heard was giggling from underneath the tree, where she was not on the floor, but she was crouching because of the tree falling on top. She was just giggling and laughing. There wasn't one single moment of disapprobation. And then she got hold of a present from under the tree and gave it to me because she knew that I was experiencing shame and guilt. And my father was a war hero and very militaristic. So she knew that he would probably chastise me afterwards when he was removed from her presence. So she said, now, Joseph, be kind to your son. Amazing experience.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do feel free to ask any questions, and I'll pick them up in the chat box if you have anything specific of Dear Jude. Getting a dose of the wisdom from a fearless, uneducated mother of all. Yeah, absolutely. Any questions? People are just celebrating. And there's one wonderful person who is Julie from Kennet, the Avon Canal in Wiltshire. So she's very close to where you are at the moment. Jude, as we move towards the end of our conversation, I would love it to go on and on and on and on. So I hope that you will receive the invitation of coming back on to Deep Dialogues in the next season of Global Female Soul Stewards. It would be wonderful to have you back on, or to create the symposium. You are in the process of acknowledging the whole substance of the way that the old paradigms are being rewritten. Moving us into an understanding of a brave new world, of a new gestalt. Your hopes for this brave new world are?
Well, I have to say, Stewart, that firstly, hi, Julie. I know you're close by. It's lovely that you are. I talk about what I'm writing about as a science of love, because for me, the universe's most fundamental relational aspect is that of love. We're not in a lonely universe. We're not in a separate universe. We're in a universe where everything is related to everything else. And so when I speak of love, I'm not speaking about, human love. I'm speaking of a universe that is inevitably, beneficially loving. And so for me, I go back to what Teilhard de Chardin said, at the end of the First World War, when the guns fell silent from that terrible conflict. And he said something along the lines of, when human beings discover the power of love, we will have discovered the power of fire for the second time. And it seems to me that what now is coming forward with this understanding of unity and unified reality is that we are innately related by love. And so for us to remember that and discover that and live from that basis and literally live by what virtually every spiritual tradition talks of, which is the golden rule: treat others and our planetary home as you'd wish to be treated. Just going back for a moment to Queen Elizabeth, that is how she treated everyone. She lived the golden rule. She embodied the golden rule. And it, with this emergent understanding, it invites us into that loving relationship of interdependence and ultimately into being of who we really are. And so for me, that understanding literally is the groundswell, is the invitation of this adventure. The universe, it seems to me, and Gaia, it seems to me, is inviting us into this evolution of our consciousness and this remembering of wholeness. And my goodness me, the wonders that can bring us into in this ongoing, I hope, and trust and have authentic hope because of this, our next onward journey as human beings.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what's wonderful is that vibrationally, your last sharing with us has a beautiful dovetail into a question that's just come up from Lauren Rose, which is, could you possibly expand on multidimensionality? Because if the love is implicit, multidimensionality becomes explicit. But exactly. I know your own process. I wonder if you could. She's asking, what is multidimensionality in your perception?
Okay. Well, what we're now understanding is that as our universe exists and evolves as a unified, non-locally unified entity, then it does so not just at this level of the physical realm, as it were, but at higher, we might use a metaphor of higher vibrational states of awareness. So, for example, elemental realms, angelic realms, archetypal realms. And so what this does is it invites us into naturalizing our relationship with such intelligence and archetypal wisdom, for guidance, for insights. It naturalizes synchronicities. It naturalizes our superpower of intuition. It naturalizes, supernormal, not supernatural or paranormal phenomena of telepathy, remote viewing, whatever it might be. For me, beyond all of that is the joy that I've experienced since I was 4 years old of engaging with such multidimensional realities and wisdom. Because at 4 years old, nobody told me they didn't exist. And from 4 years old, I've known they do. And that's been a lifelong journey that's enriched my journey immeasurably. And it's a journey and an invitation that's open to all of us, because this is who we really are. This is our innate beingness as, microcosmic co-creators of a multidimensional, evolutionary, living and evolutionary universe. And I personally feel that naturalizing those relationships and guidance is fundamental to how we heal our relationships with ourselves and each other and our planetary home Gaia and all her children. And so thereby how we do embody and experience authentic hope for the future.
I hope that helps. It certainly helped me, because it's so wonderful to hear this very unique perspective addressed from this wonderful cosmologist, but also we can feel that Jude is so beautifully embodied and that our heart is so open. This has been an extraordinary conversation, and from the very core of me, the very depth of my soul, I want to say thank you to you, Jude, and hopefully we will be able to continue this at some other time. Now, where do people get hold of you, my darling?
The best way is through WholeWorld-View, Stewart, which is www.whole, W-H-O-L-E, world, W-O-R-L-D, -view, V-I-E-W.org. There's so many resources on that, all about unified reality, our partners that we link up and lift up with, so much on there, and folks can sign up to our free newsletter. And just, be involved and encouraged and invited and welcomed into this great adventure.
And Ryan's timed it beautifully. My tech manager, for those of you who are wondering who Ryan is there. He's placed it on the screen, as you see, the website that Jude has created, which is an extraordinary journey in itself, beautifully created, with a lot of amazing points of stimuli for you to really indulge in now. And are there any final questions from anybody? You need to be swift about it, because it takes a little bit of time. It's a proof that pudding's in the eating. There seems to be a tremendous amount of deep inner hearing, and rather like the deep inner hearing that you were referring to earlier on about the global pause, which many people call the global lockdown, but I know that you were in a pause state, listening very deeply.
I was. In fact, the Story of Gaia was written during that period, and I feel that I was able for it to write me because I was in that listening. I was in that hearing and listening state throughout.
Yeah. And I was honoring the female voice by really expanding on my book Diana, the Voice of Change, because it was really beginning to take off in 2021, which was right in the middle of this extraordinary time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know you're going to be feeling huge thanks in your heart, in your soul, for spending an hour with this very remarkable lady. Please do go to her website. Please do tune into her extraordinary books. You will find them an absolute delight, and particularly the Story of the Gaia. But then, having said that, Cosmic Hologram is just one of the most beneficial things that I think I've ever done, acquiring it and reading it and allowing it to become literally subsumed within the whole quality of the way that I'm living my life. So, Jude, thank you.
Thank you, Stewart. And you said earlier you'd like to invite me back. Yes, please. I'd love to.
So everybody, please do not bait your breath waiting for that. Keep breathing in and out. But I'm sure you'll agree that it will be mightily advertised, that you will all come back when dear Jude Currivan comes back. So thank you for tuning in, everybody. Namaste, namaste. Please don't disappear yet, Jude. Thank you, Ryan.